there's something else very interesting that I want you to notice. In Ezekiel chapter 8, we have a description of the apostasy of Israel shortly before Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the city of Jerusalem. Now, we don't have time to study this whole chapter, so I'm just going to synthesize. Basically, chapter 8 speaks about abominations that God's own people were committing within the city of Jerusalem. These were not the pagans that were committing these abominations. God's own people were committing these abominations. And the greatest abomination, we're going to read this in a moment, was that they were worshiping the sun. That was the greatest abomination that God's people were committing within the city. But do you know that it says that there was a group of people that were not committing this abomination of sun worship? In fact, it says there in Ezekiel chapter 8 that they were sighing and crying because of the abominations that were being committed in the city. And God said, go through the city and put a sign or a mark on the foreheads of those who sigh and cry because of the abominations that are being committed in the earth. Notice that there's a contrast between those who have the sign or the seal of God and those who are worshiping what? Those who are worshiping the sun, which are practicing this terrible abomination. Let's read Ezekiel 8, verses 16 and 17. So, he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house. This is God's own people, folks. And there, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men. By the way, these are the religious leaders. These are the preachers of the people. About 25 men with their backs toward the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east, and they were worshiping the sun toward the east. And he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? Is it a trivial thing to the house of Judah to commit these what? These abominations, which they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence. Then they have returned to provoke me to anger. Indeed, they put the branch to their nose, which means that they just flaunt this in God's face. So what was the greatest abomination? They were worshiping the sun. Interesting. But there was a contrasting group who sighed and cried, who had the seal of God, the sign of God on their foreheads. It must be that they are opposite to those who were worshiping what? To those who were worshiping the sun. Interesting. Who were they worshiping then? They must have been worshiping the Creator. Notice Ezekiel chapter 9 and verse 4. And the Lord said to him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it. And by the way, it says, after all of God's people are sealed, go in the midst of the city, destroy all of those who are practicing the abominations, and do not spare a single person, because the wrath of God was going to be poured out upon Jerusalem. Not everyone was destroyed, though. Now, let me ask you, was Jerusalem destroyed because Israel was desecrating the Sabbath? That's what Ezekiel chapter 8 and 9 seems to indicate, but we don't have to guess. Some people say, oh, you're saying that the city of Jerusalem was destroyed simply because they were breaking the Sabbath? That's why everyone was slain, according to Ezekiel chapter 8? That's exactly what I'm saying, because the Bible says it. Notice Jeremiah chapter 17 and verse 27. Jeremiah 17, verse 27. Here God says, but if you will not heed me to hallow the Sabbath day, such as not carrying a burden when entering the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will kindle a fire in its gates, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem, and it shall not be quenched. Was Jerusalem destroyed because they were desecrating the Sabbath? Absolutely. And what were they worshiping? They were worshiping the sun. Is it just possible that this scene is going to be repeated in the book of Revelation?